Part two at the moment here. We're exploring a long series of the history of the United States of America, the Jewish community history here on today on the special edition. And we did the first part, a very, very short first part. I don't know if today's session also is going to be so long, but we're going to try and cover some ground. There's so much to talk about. Obviously, the United States of America currently has many millions of people living there. The Jewish community has got respectively. So there's so much. But we're really concentrating on the early years. Happened to be Thanksgiving just a few days ago in the United States of America. So I thought it's definitely an opportune time to continue and make progress within regards to it. So we're talking about the previous era in of itself, especially in the early 1600s, colonial era, and just the start basically of Jewish immigration. That's how we started off the previous class, let's just say, in of itself. We're talking about how there was other, let's say, streams of Judaism at that stage in time. When we're speaking about towards the end, we were speaking about religious tolerance in of itself, and the congregation She'erit Yisrael, which happened to be in New York City, I think the oldest continuous congregation in the year 1687, and the first synagogue was erected in the year 1728. And we spoke about the various, we spoke about it and the various different chief rabbis. There were Rabbi Benjamin Wolf, Rabbi Gershon Siakas, various other rabbis. Had Rabbi Henry Jacobs, Rabbi Henry Pereira Mendez, Rabbi David Desola. It's a whole topic into itself, and I think currently it's headed by Rabbi Meir Soloveitchik, respectively. I think that's how we ended up, let's say, the last session. Now, we're talking about the revolutionary era here at this stage in time. I think we're going to start off on that specific note in of itself. So anyone, welcome to our community. And we'll talk about it. I think it was at the beginning of the Revolutionary War in 1776. There was around 2,000 Jewish people living in the British North American colonies. The vast majority, I believe, were Sephardic Jews who emigrated from the Dutch Republic, from Great Britain and the Iberian Peninsula. Many Jewish people, American Jewish people, supported the Patriots' cause. Some would enlist in the, let's say, the Continental Army. South Carolinian, there was a planter from South Carolina of the name Francis Salvador. He became the first American Jew to be killed in action during the war. Well, I think there was a businessman, someone named Haim Solomon, joined the New York branch of the Sons of Liberty and became one of the key financiers, Continental Army. Let's say something about Mr. Solomon over here himself, because we happen to be speaking about him. I think he passed away in the year 1785. He only lived about 45 years. He was Polish born, and I think he actually came from, if I'm not mistaken, from a Sephardic Jewish family, if I'm not mistaken, but was from Poland, Lithuania, which was quite actually interesting. Not many Jewish people were from there in of itself. And just a very famous figure. I think was involved in Jewish community affairs, especially in Congregation Mikveh Israel in Philadelphia. And that's famous synagogue also we should talk about. It's also especially from the early years. Maybe we'll speak about it in the coming minutes. I think actually maybe we'll speak about Mikveh Israel also at the moment, because that was a Sephardic Orthodox Jewish synagogue in Philadelphia. I think that also traces back from the year 1740. It's a Spanish-Portuguese synagogue following the Rite of Amsterdam, I believe. I think 1740 to 1782 we'll see the burial ground and founding. Over there, there was someone named Nathan Levy, I think it was a Jewish merchant in Philadelphia, would actually build it. I think one of his children will pass away, sadly, in the year 1738. The history itself comes back from September the 25th, 1740. I think it was a province of Pennsylvania. Someone named Thomas Penn authorized a burial ground at that stage in time, I think also known as Mikveh Israel cemetery in itself, respectively. Now, Jews, I think in Philadelphia was a key community in 1740s and 1750s, organized themselves informally for services. Come what 1775, the city of Philadelphia had a population of 35,000 people, where 300 were Jewish, I believe, at that point in time. We talked about how these congregations of Congregation She'erit Yisrael, I think, will be very much overflapping to some degree within regards to this. We've spoken about Gershon Mendez Siakas in the last presentation, where he passed away in 1816. There was, I think, very interesting, the Mikveh Israel community in of itself. I think maybe it's had different locations as time has gone on. That's something that I'll have to point out in regards to different places, let's just say, And yeah, it'll be interesting to actually see if there was a list of different rabbis of this synagogue, respectively. I think the famous rabbis, Rabbi Abraham Newman. There will have many Ashkenazic rabbis heading this community. I think a prominent physician, Jacob da Silva, Solis Cohen, for example, was involved very much in the synagogue. Noam Chomsky, I think he happens to be an American professor, if I'm not mistaken. This is more in the recent years, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe we'll record it. I think we recorded a few videos, if I'm not mistaken. There was Reb Lesser, who was an American Jewish religious leader. I think he had a period in the pulpit of this community. And yeah, there was other famous rabbis, let's just say, in of itself. There was Sabato Morias, who lived between 1823 to 1897. He would be an Italian-American rabbi of Portuguese descent. He would be the leader of the Mikveh Israel Synagogue in Philadelphia. He was a pioneer of Italian Jewish studies in America and founder, I think, of the Jewish Theological Seminary, which would later on, I believe, become a conservative associate. But I think it starts off in his times as an Orthodox synagogue. There was another rabbi over there, Rabbi Emmanuel Nunes Carvello, who was an American Jewish religious leader, and Lexi Gofra. And Robert Jacob Raphael Cohen, another key rabbi. He was, I think, in England, Canada, and the United States of America between 1738 to 1811. Manuel Josephson, if I'm not mistaken, had come to Mikveh Israel from New York in 1776. And he actually tried to build a mikveh there, if I'm not mistaken, and be opened under his organization at one stage in time. So you can see it was decorated with various different rabbis at various different points of time. We did speak about Rabbi Siaksas beforehand. He was a famous chazan of the Congregation She'erit Yisrael, New York City's first Spanish-Portuguese synagogue. For about 5 decades, I believe he would be over there. So very interesting. But I think we recorded a video, if I'm not mistaken, about the Congregation Mikveh Israel at a specific point in time. But Chaim Solomon would have a key role within regards to that. Okay, so let's continue over here as we explore the history of the American Jewish community, the really early years. It's going to be a many-part series over here. I think there was a high-ranking Jewish officer in the Patriot forces, was someone named Colonel Mordechai Sheftal. I think he was a famous merchant, colonel, if I'm not mistaken. He was born actually in Savannah in the province of Georgia. He was a key figure at that point in time, someone that, whether or not brigadier general, I think there was someone named Moses Hazan, who was a brigadier general in the Continental Army. And his service, let's say, included particularly some raids during the expulsion of the Acadians and so on and so forth. Other American Jews, I think, at that point in time, was someone named David Salisbury Franks, if I'm not mistaken, another key figure. And he would suffer because of his association with the Continental Army. And Benedict Arnold, if I'm not mistaken, he was another key figure at that point in time. The US President George Washington remembered the Jewish contribution when he wrote to the Sephardic congregation of Newport, Rhode Island. There was a letter, "May the children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in the land to merit and enjoy the goodwill of other inhabitants, while everyone shall sit safely under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none other to make him afraid." Now, I think there was a small Jewish community will also develop, I think, in Newport during the 18th century. I think this will include someone named Aaron Lopez, who was a Jewish merchant who played a big role in the town's involvement. I think at that point in time there was slave trade and so on and so forth. Who was Aaron Lopez over here? He was born in Lisbon. I think he was conversa. Also, his family moved to the British America, if I'm not mistaken. He was born in 1731 in Lisbon. He was a merchant. He was working, I think at that point in time, slave trade was very, very common. If I'm not mistaken, he did a vast amount of philanthropy work, if I'm not mistaken. Charitable causes, let's just say, himself. He contributed to build a college in English Colony in Rhode Island, if I'm not mistaken. And he would help build the famous Toro Synagogue, another key synagogue in America, let's just say. I think during the American Revolution, Mr. Lopez harbored Jewish refugees in his Leicester home. Respectively, citizenship we'll speak about. I think he passed away in 1782, if I'm not mistaken. Let's speak about the famous Toro Synagogue, another key synagogue in the early years in the 18th century in America. I think it's built in 1763 in Newport, Rhode Island. And I think the current occupant is known as Congregation Ahavat Yisrael, if I'm not mistaken. And it was declared in 1946, more recent times, a National Historic Site. So it's actually Ashkenazic synagogue over there. The first congregation was composed, though, of Sephardic Jews, if I'm not mistaken, who had migrated from the West Indies, if I'm not mistaken, and they followed the Spanish-Portuguese liturgy at that point in time. I think there was upheaval of late 18th century. Obviously, there was threats of war would loom. I think the congregation entrusted the synagogue seat and Torah scrolls to New York's Congregation Shearith Israel. And over time, obviously, demographics will change, and now it will become an Ashkenazic community, let's just say, in itself. And very interesting. Let's explore a bit of the history, because I think it's connected. It was established, I think, in 1654, was completed in 1763. It was obviously the Shearith Israel originally, which we had to spoke about. Notable leaders of this congregation included Rabbi Abraham Pereira Mendes, who we spoke about in when we recorded a video about the Jacob Jewish community. He served as rabbi in Jacob in Jamaica and England and the United States. Rabbi Henry Samuel Morias, who we spoke about before, between 1900 to 1901. And there was famous Chazan, someone named Isaac Toro, who was a Dutch-born American rabbi, if I'm not mistaken. He would arrive in Newport, Rhode Island in 1760 to work as a Chazan. And interesting enough, so maybe we'll speak about him at a later stage in time. I think that'll be very interesting because Torah College, named for the Torah family, so he's a key person, let's just say, and I think it's going to be important to maybe at a later stage speak about him inside the series, the Chazanot series that we are doing. I think the Torah O Synagogue's original congregation was founded in 1654, as we said before. The new Torah Synagogue building was formally dedicated on 2nd December 1763. We talked about the previous people. In 1946, it was designated National Historic Site, affiliated to National Park Service, if I'm not mistaken. And I think it's located on 72 Torah Street, and it's an Orthodox synagogue, if I'm not mistaken. Now, it went through different waves of time periods, let's just say in itself. George Washington, as we mentioned before, was a president in 1790, would speak about it. I think the Congregation of Newport, for example, was originally, as we said before, composed of Spanish-Portuguese Jews, become Ashkenazic Jews later on, if I'm not mistaken. From the 1850s, a building was opened occasionally for worship. It was reopened on a regular basis in 1883, and obviously there was vast immigrants from Eastern European Jews who will come at that point in time. There'll be various restoration periods and so on and so forth, but a magnificent synagogue, let's just say, in itself. And we're going to speak about many synagogues here on, I've got a feeling, in this class over the series as will come on. Okay, so come on 1790, the approximate 2,500 American Jewish community would face various legal restrictions in various states, would prevent non-Christians from holding public office, I believe, at that point in time. And I think there was a US Bill of Rights in 1791. Sephardic Jews would become active in community affairs in the 1790s. They will achieve political equality in 5 states in which they were most numerous. There was, let's say, other barriers did not officially fall, let's just say, for decades in the state of Rhode Island in 1842, North Carolina, 1868, New Hampshire, 1877. Let's just say in itself. Let's go now into the 19th century. There's so much to talk about, and there's gonna be different dynamics to the series because we want to really do a proper justice to this. Now, following traditional and religious cultural teachings, let's say, there was would improve, let's just say, for the Jewish residents in the United States, more organized communities in the early 19th century. There was a Jewish orphanage set up by Charleston in South Carolina in the year 1801, I believe. This would be like a starting feat, let's just say, at that point in time, where things will start changing at that point in time. Now, orphanage will open at that point in time. The first Jewish school in the Polonese Talmud Torah was established in New York in 1806. In 1843, the first national secular Jewish organization in the United States, the B'nai B'rith, was established at that point in time. Very, very interesting. Jewish Texans, obviously being a great part of the Texas history since first European explorers arrived in the 16th century. Spanish Texas did not welcome like identifiable Jews or very recognizable ones, but they came in any case. I think João de la Porta with John Lafitte of Galveston, Texas in 1816, and Morris Henry was in Valesco, I think in the 1820s, if I'm not mistaken. Jews would fight in the armies of the Texas Revolution of 1836, and others in San Jacinto. There's someone named Dr. Dr. Albert Moses Levy, who became a surgeon for the Revolutionary Texas forces in 1835. He would participate in the capture of Bexar and join the Texas Navy that year. Now, he's a key figure, I believe. He was born into a Jewish family from the Netherlands, probably from Amsterdam, reported over. He attended the School of Medicine in the University of Pennsylvania, and he would join the New Orleans Greys, and he would establish a practice in Metagardo. He was appointed to the medical board of Republic of Texas, I think in 1838, and he's commemorated even in recent days in Texas. He's a key figure, let's just say, over there. Now, friends, anyone tuning in live, we're exploring the history of American Jewry here on this special edition. So if you haven't subscribed yet to our community, please subscribe now and join as we are approaching close to 8,000 subscribers. I'm just going to take a short break as we're exploring the history of the American Jewish community, and we're in the 19th, earlier part of the 19th century period over here as we're exploring the history. So wait 1 minute and we'll be back in 1 minute, friends. Hi, shalom, everyone. Thanks for being patient and waiting. We're continuing. We are speaking at the moment about the history of American Jewry, many-part series. This is going to be, as we're speaking about, in the earlier parts of the mid-1800s over here. I think it was by 1840, the Jewish constituted a tiny but nevertheless middle-class minority of about 15,000 out of 17 million Americans counted in the United States of America census at that point in time. So you can see much smaller community than they're now. Jews would intermarry, let's say, freely within non-Jews, which obviously we do not celebrate over here. The point, we don't like assimilation. It would continue trend at that point in time, and it would begin, let's say, a century earlier. As Jewish immigration will increase, the Jewish population, come what the year 1848 now, was 50,000 people. And there was anti-Semitism, I believe, at that point in time, especially in newspapers, literature, drama, art, popular culture will grow, let's say, in commonplace. Unfortunately, physical attacks would even become common at that point in time. During the 19th century, especially 1840s, 1850s, Jewish immigration at that point in time was now much more Ashkenazi Jews, especially from Germany. They would bring about more liberal, educated population, which would have seen, let's say, experience within regards to Jewish enlightenment, Haskalah, respectively. It was, I think, in the United States during the 19th century that two of the major branches of Judaism were established by these German immigrants: Reform Judaism, out of German Reform Judaism, and Conservative Judaism, let us say, which was in reaction to perceived liberalness of the Reform movement at that point in time. Now, during the American Civil War, so let's now go forward a little bit. This was approximately 3,000 Jewish people. Out of about now, there was 150,000 Jews in the United States of America, would fight on the Confederate side, and 7,000 will fight on the Union side. Jews also played leadership roles on both sides. I think there was, with 9 Jewish generals serving in the Union Army, the most notable of whom was Brigadier General Edward S. Solomon. He was a German-American politician, and he was born to a Jewish family in the Duchy of Schleswig, I think, if I'm not mistaken. He attained a rank at the age of 29, if I'm not mistaken. There was also 21 Jewish colonels who fought for the Union, including someone named Marcus Spiegel of Ohio. He was a high-ranking Jewish officer in the United States, if I'm not mistaken. A key figure also, Max Friedman. And at that point in time, Judah P. Benjamin served as Secretary of State and Secretary of War of the Confederacy. There was various different Jewish bankers which played key roles in providing government financing during the Civil War in of itself, respectively. There was the Speyer family and the Seligman family for the Union, and Emil Erlanger and Company, if I'm not mistaken, for the Confederacy. I think come what December 1862, there was a general of the name Ulysses Grant, if I'm not mistaken, who was a president of the United States, serving between 1869 to 1877. He got, I think, angry at the illegal trade in smuggled cotton at that point in time. He would expel Jews from areas under his control in Tennessee, Mississippi, and Kentucky. So you could see there was institutional anti-Semitism over it. Jewish people will appeal to President Abraham Lincoln, who immediately ordered General Grant to rescind the order. And I think, very, very interesting. So that would be at that point in time. Abraham Lincoln, I think, was a president, the 16th president of the United States of America from 1861, and he was assassinated in 1865. Now, let's talk about participation in politics. For example, Jewish people will organize a political group in the United States. Especially, there was, in the United States, a reaction to the 1840 Damascus blood libel, which we've spoken about on various occasions before. They would actually bring a political sphere at that point in time because of the response of the United States to this blood libel. The Damascus affair took place in 1840. There was a disappearance of an Italian monk and his servant in Damascus Jewish quarter, for which a large number of Jews were summarily tortured until they confessed, which obviously they didn't need to confess about this murder. It was a blood libel. And we spoke about it, I think, especially in the video we recorded about Rabbi Antebi and on various occasions before. So I think the first Jewish member of the United States House of Representatives was someone named Louis Charles Levin, if I'm not mistaken, and David Levy Yulee, if I'm not mistaken. They were elected in 1845. Official government anti-Semitism will continue at that point in time. Let's say it would be not uncommon. I think with New Hampshire only offering equality to Jews and Catholics in 1877, they were the last state to do so. So if I'm not mistaken. And so how about in banking? They were part of banking, especially in the mid-19th century. A number of German Jews founded investment banking firms, which later, let's say, became mainstays of the industry. Most prominent Jewish banks in the United States were investment banks rather than commercial banks. Important, let's say, banking firms will include Goldman Sachs, Lehman Brothers, Kuhn Loeb, Bachet & Co., Seligman & Co., of itself, especially in the 1860s, as say, all the way to the 1920s. Let's now talk about Western settlements. In the 19th centuries, Jews will come all over the American West. The majority of, let's say, immigrants at that stage in time were German Jews, as we said before, especially in the 19th century. There was California gold rush of 1849. Jews will establish themselves prominently on the West Coast with important settlements in Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington, also San Francisco. It will become the second largest Jewish city in the nation, if I'm not mistaken. I think, for example, Levi Strauss, who lived between 1829 to 1902, would start a wholesale dealer in clothing, bedding, and notions. I think 1873, he introduced the first blue jeans, very famous, obviously we all know about it. Everyone was a newcomer in of itself. I think there's someone named Eisenberg, Kahn, and Toll in 2009 will emphasize the creative freedom Jews found in Western society when they came in. Many Jewish immigrants to the West found success as merchants. Many will work as bankers, miners, freighters, ranchers, and farmers. Otto Mears helped to build railroads across Colorado. Who was Otto Mears? He was a Colorado railroad builder and entrepreneur who played a major role, I think, early development of southwestern Colorado. Someone named Solomon Bieber. Who was he? He's another key figure. He became the governor of the Acoma Pueblo Indians, if I'm not mistaken. So he was also someone that's very well been spoken about on various occasions before. I think My Jewish Learning website will actually chronicle about him. And I think though these are by no means only two Jewish immigrants to make themselves in the West, they are used, their names, let's say, to showcase a wide variety of paths Jewish settlers pursued. There was various different organizations like the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society and Baron Morris de Hirsch's Jewish Agricultural Society. He happened to be a Jewish financier from Germany, a philanthropist who set up charitable educational courses to improve the oppressed European Jewry. He served as a conduit for connecting Jewish newcomers arriving from Europe with settlements in Upper Midwest, Southwest, and Far West in of itself. Now, there was someone, very, very interesting. Some people will argue that Jewish women played a prominent role also in the establishment of Jewish communities throughout the West. There was a first synagogue in Arizona, Tucson's Temple Emmanuel was established by a Hebrew Ladies Benevolent Society. So then that is, my friends, that is actually a Reform synagogue, if I'm not mistaken. That was just to get an idea about the various different synagogues that was. I think it was actually established, if I'm not mistaken, in 1910. Originally, I think it was, or maybe in 1905, it even started off, and they would have services. Remember, I think it was always a Reform synagogue, if I'm not mistaken, and it's just another well-known place at that point in time. It was just because it's a historic video, I think it's important to talk about it. There were community leaders, Jewish activists that were prominent at that point in time, municipal and state politics. Let's just say there was various Reform congregations, more was being built up in those places. The Reform communities would give little support to Zionism, I think even down to the 1940s. That's something we have to point about over here. Now let's start talking more synagogues of the United States of America. For anyone tuning in live, please subscribe to our channel. We are community here. And let's talk about the more older synagogues of the United States of America, because we're really talking about the early years. So Sephardic congregations included. Obviously, we talked about the She'erit Yisrael, founded in 1654. There was Jeshuat Yisrael, founded in 1658 in Newport, obviously, also known as Torah Synagogue. We mentioned it before. Congregation Mikveh Israel, we spoke about it before, in Savannah, Georgia, in 1733. There was a Kahal Kadosh Bet Elokim, which actually was founded in the 1740s, a Reform synagogue. Kahal Kadosh Bet Shalom, once again, a congregation in Richmond, Virginia. I think it was founded actually all the way back in 1789, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was Sephardic. It was also the first Sephardic Kahal, let's just say, in Virginia, respectively. I think it was it would have merging later on, if I'm not mistaken. A very, very old synagogue. I think, which we have to point out, there was George Jacobs. Someone named George Jacobs was a Jamaican American rabbi. He would serve there, if I'm not mistaken, between 1857 to 1869. So that's very interesting. So he was a key figure, let's just say, at that point in time. Maybe we should speak about him at a later stage inside the series. Afterwards, Jacob Ezekiel, who was, I think, the father, future sculptor Moses Jacob Ezekiel. He was an American merchant, if I'm not mistaken, a leader of the Jewish community in Virginia. He was on the board of Hebrew Union College. B'nai B'rith he was connected to, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that unfortunately, assimilation will actually affect that specific place in its time and affect both Sephardic and Jewish communities over there. In 1898, I think the Sephardi Kahal Kadosh Bet Shalom will merge with the Reform congregation of Beit Haba, if I'm not mistaken. So it will become, I'd assume, a Reform synagogue or Reform connected synagogue at a later stage in time. The St. Thomas Synagogue was another one of the older synagogues, founded in 1796 in the Virgin Islands, if I'm not mistaken. And I think once again a Spanish-Portuguese synagogue, if I'm not mistaken, it was constructed in 1833, and it was I think now it's once again a Reform synagogue. I don't know if it was originally a Reform synagogue or not, but originally seemingly it was a Spanish-Portuguese synagogue, if I'm not mistaken, or it was founded by then. Remember, demographics might have changed it because it was like a totally new community. Nefutzot Yehuda. New Orleans, Louisiana, was founded in 1846, and later on merged with the Shanari Chassat synagogue, and once again it will join the Reform movement over here. Now there were various, so you can see some of these Sephardi congregations will end up, probably because of demographic reasons, become Reform. Now, Ashkenazi congregations, I think until 1795, all documented congregations in the United States followed Sephardic minhag. However, many included Ashkenazi members also. But there are, I think, some references to Ashkenazi Bet Elohim in Charleston prior to 1791. I think the first Ashkenazi Rite synagogue in the US was founded in 1761. Congregation Rodef Shalom in Philadelphia, for example, was founded in 1795. The oldest existing Ashkenazi congregation in the United States of America, if I'm not mistaken, it is. And I think it's had, once again, connected to Reform movements over this. So we're just like seeing how many Reform movements there were. The KK B'nai Yisrael in Ohio, and another Ashkenazic Reform movement. B'nai Jeshurim, founded in 1825 in New York City. Once again, another famous synagogue in New York City, respectively. And I think it was listed on the National Register of Historic Places, if I'm not mistaken. And the oldest Ashkenazic synagogue, also, let's just say, spoken about, was founding coalition of younger members of the Shearit Yisrael. I think the first rabbi was someone of the name Samuel Mayer Isaacs, if I'm not mistaken. He was appointed in 1839. And I think currently, if I'm not mistaken, it's a non-denominational synagogue. So I don't think that's an Orthodox synagogue also at the moment. So that's just by seeing the name of it. If I'm not mistaken, there's other synagogues talking about Shanari Chesed in New Orleans, found in 1828. It merged, I think, with Sephardic Nefutzot Yehuda. If I'm not mistaken, they would join once again the Reform movements also. And there were other existential buildings, old ones at that stage in time, including the Torah Synagogue, Congregation Mishkan Yisrael in Connecticut. This was another Reform synagogue in 1840, so you can really see there was a huge Reform community in the early years. Lloyd Street Synagogue was another Reform. I think it was also an Orthodox Jewish former synagogue prior in Baltimore and Maryland in 1843. Angel on Cesar Center in 1849. So we're just going to have to wrap up this video here. Temple Israel in Indiana in 1867. Another Reform synagogue. The Be'er Chaim Temple, a Reform synagogue. Once again, Plum Street Temple. Another Reform synagogue. Gates of Heaven Synagogue in Wisconsin. So you can see at that point in time, another historic synagogue known as Old Synagogue, if I'm not mistaken, in Wisconsin. That's very, very interesting. This was definitely at an earlier stage, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not too sure the association with the synagogue in itself, but we're talking going back 1800s. Congregation Berit Shalom in Troy, in New York in 1870. B'nai Yisrael in Texas. This was another Reform Central Synagogue in New York, 1870, another Reform synagogue. Congregation Bet Israel, another Reform synagogue. So there were many, many Reform synagogues in the late 1800s that will actually open. Temple Be'el, for example, Havei Tzedek in Vermont, a conservative synagogue in 1885. Congregation Bet Emet, another Reform synagogue. Temple Aaron in Trinidad, Colorado, if I'm not mistaken, another Reform synagogue at that point in time. It would be good to hear about more Orthodox synagogues. B'nai Yisrael Temple in Utah, Abat Bet Yisrael in Idaho, another Reform synagogue, the Rosenhain Synagogue. This was actually, I think, commonly is an Orthodox synagogue. Actually, we found an Orthodox synagogue. Let's speak about that for a minute before we conclude. I think it's located in New Jersey, if I'm not mistaken. It was completed in 1898. I think now there was fewer than 100 surviving 19th century synagogues in its place in itself. It's, I think, in Rosenhain in New Jersey, respectively. So we did find one of the very early Orthodox synagogues there. Temple B'nai Shalom, once again, another Reform synagogue, I think, in Alabama, respectively. So there were many synagogues, I think, especially in the Da'at Yisrael congregation district in DC would be a synagogue, I think, in Cleveland Park neighborhood, if I'm not mistaken. It's a conservative synagogue, though, I have to point out. Washington Hebrew congregation. Also, there were many synagogues in the earlier times in of itself, and I think one class will not necessarily do justice. Maybe we'll speak about it more. In New York, for example, there was many synagogues, but many of them, there was Congregation Ahavat Yisrael, I think, was founded in 1886 in Brooklyn. That happens to have been. It's if I'm not mistaken, this is a more of a traditional synagogue in, I think, of German immigrants originally on the 1800s, respectively. I think that actually, if I'm not mistaken, might be an, I'm not too sure if that's actually an Orthodox. I think that might be an Orthodox shul, if I'm not mistaken, Orthodox synagogue. But that I'll just have to double check on there also. Yeah, so this was just, we're talking about the older synagogues and older buildings from previous years. It's a special edition over here, where we are talking about the history of the United States of America. In the next session over here, we are going to start talking about the immigration of Ashkenazi Jews in the late 1800s over here. So watch this space. Anyone you're tuning in live at the moment to our community, please subscribe to our channel, as this is going to be a many-part series where we speak about the United States of America. So please subscribe. And wishing you well. Have a great day, and thanks for watching, and thanks for speaking about time. There's so much ground for us to get to bring about at this point in time. We're gonna try and there's so much. We're gonna try and learn about how these congregations will form and grow as time went on. So wishing you well, and please subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. Thank you.